Welcome to the Carlisle Local School District Board Meeting, regular board meeting for Monday, June 24th, 2024. This meeting is a meeting of the Board of Education in public for purpose of conducting the school district's business and is not to be considered a public meeting. There is a time for public participation during the meeting. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Miller.
Here.
Mrs. Morris.
Here.
Mr. Jewell. Here. Mrs. McIntosh.
Here.
Mrs. Milligan.
Here.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Dr. Bale, would you like to introduce the next portion?
Certainly, I would. Thank you, Ms. Miller. First up, we have Kristen tomorrow from LifeWise. Going to give a little presentation, and kind of get that ball rolling a little bit. Thank you, ladies.
Thank you guys for having us. Can you hear me? My name is Kristen King, and I am a proud Carlisle mom to a soon-to-be sixth grader here. I'm also a cheer coach, and I'm involved in a lot of different activities here in our community. What I came to you today to discuss is LifeWise Academy. What LifeWise Academy is a Bible-based character-building education program that operates under the Supreme Court guidelines for release time for religious instruction. So what we would like to do is open a LifeWise here in Carlisle and offer our services to any students who have parental permission that would be able to attend and get a quick Bible story lesson, preferably during a specials rotation that is not graded, so that it doesn't take anything away from the child's academics. So right now, we have a little steering committee. There's 6 of us together that have kind of figured out a temporary logistical plan. What we would like to do is offer our services possibly during a library rotation, because we know it's ungraded and we know that it's not going to, again, take away from any of the core classes that the students have to take. We would take the kids by bus or by shuttle over to Hillcrest Church, and they would receive a quick Bible lesson and character building information that goes off of that Bible story, and then we would bring them back to campus where they would go back to their normal classes. And what we're actually requesting of you guys is preferably a written acknowledgement, but either a verbal acknowledgement or a written acknowledgement that the program is coming, that we'd like to open for Carlisle, and that you guys will work with us to work out the perfect plan for Carlisle, because it does vary city to city and school district to school district.
Can I say anything? Just so I know you might have some questions, so maybe give them to me and I'll get with them, because there's some things that we have to talk about. Transportation's all worked out, the letter of acknowledgement, how that would work, and right now it's grades 1 through 5 that we're looking at.
Correct.
To start off with, so we'd have to work with Mike and Jennifer as well. So there's some, once we get all those questions answered, and they've got to get a director.
Correct. Our next step, once we've received acknowledgement from you guys, and then we were able to hire a program director who would work more in depth and get the exact schedule laid out, the exact grades that they would work with.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of wiggle
Right.
room here we need to take care of. So once we
Correct.
get those questions, I work with them, I'll get those to you, and then we can talk some logistics and those
Yep.
things, more planning.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you guys very much. I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Have
Thank
fun
you.
at Vacation Bible School. Thank you. Next, we've got Jeremy Thies, Transportation Supervisor, to give you a little ins and out of all the buses, routes, travel plans, AAA, TIC trip, everything.
Good evening. We had another great year in transportation with no accidents or major mishaps, which is a little surprising considering we had 42 vehicles run our bus stop signs this year. 31 of them were on Central Avenue right here by People's Bank. After catching them on our bus cameras and sending the videos to the police in Carlisle, Warren County, Montgomery County, of the 42 vehicles that ran our stop signs, 36 were ticketed, fined, or had their license suspended. It'd be nice if we get a little bit of a kickback on some of them fines they're handing out. Nikki Nickel was the driver of Bus 11 that had the 31 run her stop sign on Central. She did a great job of keeping the kids safe and holding them on the bus until the traffic was finally stopped. 4 of the vehicles that ran our stop signs were at stops where kids were crossing the road. Sarah O'Brien and Angie Groth both did an excellent job holding their kids on the side of the road by having the kids obey their hand signals until the cars had parked or had passed. We also had one car go around a bus on the door side while students were getting off the bus, narrowly missing them. The driver come from behind the bus and drove through a yard to get around the bus while the kids were getting off the steps. Tammy Carroll was the driver of that bus, and she was able to stop the kids by honking her horn, yelling at them. If she wouldn't have done that, they'd have kept walking right in front of the car. So she did a great job of doing that. With us averaging over 1 vehicle a week running our stop signs, the drivers did an awesome job keeping the students safe and avoiding any accidents. We safely transported 1,102 students to and from school every day and averaged 902 miles a day. That's nearly 300 more miles than from here to New York City, or 70 more miles than from here to Jacksonville. Driving that many miles every day and transporting over 1,100 students without any major incidents is a testament to how skilled and safe our drivers are. Not only does it speak highly of our drivers, but proves that we have an excellent mechanic to keep our fleet running well enough to accomplish these. I really feel that Jim Ball is the best school bus mechanic in the state of Ohio. We've even had presenters from the Ohio School Bus Mechanics Association reach out to me about Jim and tell me how he's one of the best around. They also asked him to be a teacher for new commercial vehicle inspectors to teach the air brake class for the State Highway Patrol. So when it comes to maintenance on our buses and having them prepared for inspections, he's literally one of the best in the state. We're lucky to have him. We sent 402 buses out on field trips and athletic events this year, traveling a total of 16,392 miles. That's equivalent to driving to Anchorage, Alaska and back 4 times. Again, Chris Oliver this year took the most trips. He took 114 trips, totaling 690 hours and 6,056 miles. Chris not only consistently takes field trips, he also fuels every bus and van 2 times a week. He changes all the interior air filters on the buses when needed. He helps change seat covers and foams as well as anything else he's asked to do. He works every day over the summer with other repairs. There's a few drivers I'd like to mention for going above and beyond. The first is Tammy Carroll. She's our OBI. She's recertified 7 of our veteran drivers this year and successfully trained a new driver and is currently training another new driver. She's also an expert with our routing software and helps us keep our routes up to date with changes and running efficiently. She invests a lot of her own time and money into the school bus safety days at Roscoe Roof Park, handing out candy, safety coloring books, and crayons to kids that attend her bus. This year she passed out over 200 gift bags to students at Roscoe Roof Park, coloring books, candy, and teaching them about bus safety. The other driver is Brandy Lawson. She works over the summer every day and helps with repairs that need done with the fleet. She does most of our body work, and she's pretty good at it. She's painting rims, bumpers, light covers, and anything that needs sanding or painting because of fading or wear and tear from the salt in the winter months or because of the gravel in the lot. She's always willing to do anything that's asked of her, like washing buses. She cleans out exhausts. I received 4 phone calls and emails this year from parents telling me how much they appreciate Brandy and that their kids love her. From helping their daughters with their hair, teaching them to tie their shoes, and addressing bullying on her bus. They was also called asking how to spell her name correctly. She gets a ton of personalized gifts from her parents. She gets so many gifts, other drivers have to help her carry them at the end of the year off her bus. One parent in the email I received said, getting her kids ready in the morning, since Brandy's been their driver, makes it a lot easier because they love Brandy. They don't want to make her wait. So she said, she threatens them with, you don't get to see Brandy if you don't get your stuff together in the mornings. So Brandy's a great employee to have. The last driver is Diane Rogers. She's our most senior driver. She's coming up on her 26th year. She's also one of our kindergarten drivers. She's very much respected by everyone and is also very knowledgeable of our routing software. At the beginning of every school year, she puts together binders for every bus that contains the route sheets, time sheets, work orders for bus repairs, pre-trip books, and everything else the drivers need for their daily routes. She also makes sure they all have trash bags, tissues, hand sanitizer, and cleaning wipes in their bags to go along with their stock binders. I think most of you saw there was a Facebook post about Diane this year. She had a kid on her bus that was scared of the thunderstorm and didn't want to get off the bus. So he was one of her last stops. Diane held him to the end of her route, and when she got to his house, she secured her bus, got her umbrella, and walked the kid up to the door so he wouldn't be afraid to walk in the rain and the thunderstorms. And anytime a kid leaves a backpack, musical instrument, or any personal belongings on the bus, Diane will put them in her personal car before she goes home and delivers them every time. She sets a good example for new drivers and the veteran drivers. I could speak highly about a lot of the staff in the transportation department, but those are the drivers I mentioned are the ones that really stand out. We're blessed to have such a great team and are more fortunate than almost every school in our area as far as staffing. We stay pretty fully staffed. We can't say that about most of the schools in our area. I want to thank you guys for helping with that as well, for approval, replacing buses and vans and equipment to keep up on our fleet. Our fleet's in a lot better shape. If you've been on field trips, you see some of the buses that come on field trips. Our buses look a lot better than theirs do. And that's for you guys helping us approve and get that stuff and keep them up to date. Drivers also want to thank the principals, teachers, and coaches for working well with the drivers, for backing them up with student issues, time changes, or directions on field trips. Our new drivers always mention that it's nice to have that stuff here, that a lot of our other schools do not have the staff to back them up or take pride in their buses, and it makes their job a lot easier. So with all that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of your evening and enjoy your summer.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeremy.
Yep.
Thanks,
Thank
Jeremy.
you.
See you guys. Have a good night.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Jeremy.
Do we have any visitors here with comments? Okay, let's move to the treasurer's report. Mr. Bassler?
Thank you, Mrs. Miller. We'll just move on with the action items. I have quite a few, being the month of June. First is, we need approval for the minutes from the regularly scheduled meeting for May.
Do we have a motion? First by Mr. Jewell,
Second.
second by Mrs. Morris. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jewell? Yes. Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Secondly is the financial report, which is a part of your packet, like always. I won't go into it right now. I'll talk a little bit more about the financials in the next couple of items. So need approval for the financial report.
So moved.
Mrs. Milligan for first, got a
Second.
second. Mrs. McIntosh, roll call, please.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Number 3, approve the treasurer to post all the adjustments to close the book for fiscal year 2023-24. As you know, fiscal year end is June 30.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
So moved.
And we got a first from Mrs. Morris, second by Mr. Jewell. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Next, I need approval for the supplemental appropriations for this fiscal year. If you look over those appropriations, there's just a handful that we need approval for, but you approve the whole thing. There's no changes whatsoever in the general fund. A couple of the smaller funds, like the Drama Club, I missed on that appropriation. They did 3 shows and spent a lot of money, but they also made a lot of money. So that appropriation needs to move up. Also, the federal grants, which are the accounts in the 500s, which are in the second page, those grants were adjusted right near the end, which usually happens in January, but for some reason they changed the dollar amount again in May. So there's 3 or 4 of those that need approval, and it's like hundreds of dollars. But they need to match to make sure that everything is accurate as we get ready to close the books. As we get ready to close, financially, we're in good shape. Really, no surprises. You know, some areas, yeah, they were a little higher maybe than anticipated, but not exceptionally too high. We do our best to try to be efficient and be lower in some of the other areas. Overall, once again, I don't want to sound like a broken record, nor do I want to jinx anything. But yeah, knock on wood, we're in good shape and healthy as we get ready to close for June 30. Any specific questions? And if not, we'll need approval for those appropriations.
So moved.
Do we got a motion? Mrs. Milligan first. Do we-
Second.
Second, Mrs. Morris. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
And Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Next, as we close this year, we have to be ready to start spending money like the following minute after we close to be able to get things in for the next school year. In order to be able to spend that money, we have to have appropriations approved. These are, you always pass in June, temporary appropriations, and then we come back in September and do the permanent appropriations for the year. So I need approval for next year's temporary appropriations.
So
Do we got a first by Mr. Jewell,
Second.
second by Mrs. McIntosh. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
And then lastly, no change here, but our award the contract for our property liability and fleet insurance with the Southwestern Ohio EPC insurance pool for 2024-25. One caveat is we did see a significant increase. Everybody saw a significant increase. And that's mostly to do with building values went up immensely. As you can imagine, if you're trying to insure this building, the values have gone up with the value of materials and cost to be able to build this thing, again, the same way, just in a short period of time, you know, in the last 5 to 8 years. So there was an increase in our property insurance. The rest of the insurance, the buses, the liability, we do carry cyber liability insurance as well. Not much increase in those, you know, just your typical inflationary stuff, but we did see like a 16 to 20% increase in the property insurance.
Thank you. Dr. Vale, do you have the superintendent's
Oh, we
report?
gotta-
Oh, I'm sorry. Do we have a motion for 6?
So moved.
First by Mrs. McIntosh.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Milligan.
Milligan.
Roll call, please.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Thank you very much. That's my report for the month.
Thank you. Dr. Vale?
Thank you. I was excited to get to my report, too. Thanks, Mrs. Moore. First, the non-action items district update. A couple things on here. Been busy around here. First of all, inside the building, scrubbing, mopping the floors, shampooing and the carpeting, patching and painting walls that needed it, and painting walls to kind of clean the place up. If you've not been in the new athletic hallway, you need to check that out. Fully red, and then they're going to be putting some decals in there, Carlisle Indians, and a spear in there, which will match the spear on the helmets, which will look nice. So that's been part of the inside, but as you know, it's busy, it's crazy. You walk down some hall and you swear we've got a pool because of the chlorine smell. I want to make sure that we don't have a pool because I couldn't find it before. Outside, we had a lot of grass being cut because it was such a strong growth period for a while, but now you know that with the drought, it's taken them away from cutting grass. They've been able to do other things. We've got a couple of small trees that have died. They've got been removed. The bushes will be trimmed here before the end of July, and we got some big trees up over on the street which are going to be removed. Also, I think I'd let you know that we're putting in some ADA ramps on the south parking lot and on the east parking lot where the two sidewalks are, and I believe they're coming in Wednesday, or Thursday to start to work on that. Also, the other thing Jeremy talked about, but they power washed all the buses and all the other equipment that we've got in stock the other day, to make sure everything was up to snuff and taking care of that. If you've seen the new playground is in, over in the south parking lot over there, just beyond it, and that'll be ready for use. Well, people have already been using it. And then Dan and I and Jamie met with the PTO about the shelter over there and kind of talked about where it could go and the parameters of that. And they're going to get with us with a mock plan. It's the size of it, I think he said 24 by 28. I believe is the size, concrete pad and a permanent roof, and where we're going to put that, and some tables. And then the last thing is, you've seen emails, I think, about the parking lots. The week of July 1st, they're going to start, they're going to resurface all the parking lots and stripe those, and obviously, they're not going to do them all at one day, so we'll be cordoning off some of the parking lots in some of the areas. There will always be access to the building, but we're asking everyone to make sure that they follow the signs, because every once in a while, we will get one or two people that will drive around signs and go on the grass and go where they're not supposed to go, but that's very rare, as you know. And that's all the non-action items that I have for tonight. Thank you. My action items, first of all, general district business. Approve Carlisle High School 2024-25 Student Handbook, E. Then B is the junior high handbook, attachment F. Elementary, that combines all K through 6 students in the elementary one. And that's attachment G. We're going to approve the creation of a 4th grade Title I certified teaching position beginning with the next school year. E, approve the memorandum of understanding with the Carlisle Teachers Association to continue the gift of supplemental position for the duration of the current master contract. F, we're going to hopefully approve the memorandum of understanding with Carlisle teachers for the English language learners ELL coordinator for the duration of the master contract. That's a new position. We're starting to see more and more students who will need that. And then once hopefully that's approved, we'll post that position and see who we may have to fill that. And again, that will be a as-needed type position. And then G is to approve the superintendent evaluation form, attachment J, and H, approve the treasurer evaluation form, attachment K, if I can get those approved.
Thank you. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Go ahead.
First by Mrs. McIntosh,
Second.
second by Mrs. Milligan. Roll call, please.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Thank you very much. Certified employment, approve Anne Marie Heiner as a high school math teacher for the 24-25 school year. And B, approve Josh Kugel as a middle school intervention specialist for the 24-25 school year.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Mr. Jewell first. Do I have a
Second.
second? Mrs. Morris, second. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Thank you very much. A couple classified resignations. Approve the resignation of Chris Dyes as educational classroom aide as of May 28, 2024. And B, approve the resignation of Amanda Maring as a custodian as of June 15, 2024.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. Milligan first. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second by Mrs. Morris. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Thank you very much. We have some classified employment. Approve Angie Oliver to change positions from educational aide to full-time custodian beginning July 1, 2024. B, approve Deb Dollar as kindergarten educational aide for the 24-25 school year. C, approve Kara Hasty as full-time educational elementary aide for the 2024-25 school year. Approve Mary Del Castillo as full-time educational high school aide for the 24-25 school year. And approve Kaylee Cisco as a half-day AM educational elementary for the upcoming school year.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Mrs. McIntosh first. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, Mrs. Milligan. Roll call, please.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Thank you so much. Item F, approve Jackson McIntosh as summer help in the maintenance department.
Do we have a motion,
So
please?
moved.
Got a first with Mr. Jewell.
Second.
Second, Mrs. Milligan. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Abstain.
Thank you very much. And we have some supplemental resignations. Approve the resignation of Carrie Branson as junior high student council advisor. Approve the resignation of Jill French as a peer coach. And approve the resignation of Jill French as study table monitor.
Do we have a motion?
So moved.
So moved by Mr. Jewell.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Milligan. Roll call, please.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Thank you very much for that. And the last item I have is supplemental employment. Approve Quentin Hammock as the AV coordinator. Approve Quentin Hammock as the musical advisor, Mackenzie Hammock as the thespian club advisor at 2/3, Matt Middleton as boys high school varsity head soccer coach, Abdullah Hakmi as assistant boys high school JV soccer coach, Josh Langdon as high school assistant football coach, half a contract, splitting that with Brian Steele as high school assistant football coach, half a contract, Scotty Bruns as junior high assistant football coach, and Jeff Hooks as volunteer high school football coach.
We have a motion.
So moved.
So moved by Mrs. McIntosh,
Second.
second by Mrs. Morris. Roll call, please.
Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. That's all that I have for you tonight, so I thank you very much for those approvals.
Thank you, Dr. Bale. Do we have anything for legislation report?
Yes, State Bill 112, it's safety standards, and we're going to be in really great shape because we have a new building that has all the good safety things that buildings should have. Thank goodness we have this building and not our old one. The other one is a House bill about open enrollment, and I don't think that this is going to be a huge thing here, but we do have some military families in our community, and we have open enrollment, but we may see other kids coming our way because they're going to allow open enrollment for military families. Which again, I think that we have military families and we already have open enrollment, so we should be good.
Thank you.
I have it. Did we get the glass? We already got that? Okay. I knew we were getting that, was it bulletproof glass or
It's
something?
shatterproof.
Shatterproof glass?
Yes.
We got that
We
already?
didn't get the glass, we just got the shatterproof film to put on
The
the
film,
windows. yes.
okay. And that's already been
Yes,
installed?
ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, okay. Sorry.
Okay. Do we have anything for MVCTC?
Yeah, they had their regular board meeting June 11th at 7 PM. They did, Dr. Lacey he did announce his retirement. Then they are having their June 29th at 8 AM, their retreat meeting for that. They also wanted to offer, they have a professional development offered for partnership schools. So that's something that they can offer for all of our teachers as well. So if we want to reach out to them, that is something new that they're offering.
Thank you. Do we have any old business?
I don't know that we've done anything with this, but just, I should have brought it up during my report, the science of reading that our teachers have to complete. All teachers K through 12 need to complete it, and they're on different levels, whether they're one stipend or another, or which level they are, or which pathway they take. All administrators also have to take that, although they don't get paid for that. And so we've already done for May and for June, and we're right about 50% of our teachers have already gone through that and then turned their stuff in, and we've recorded that with the state. So continuing to make inroads on that.
Thank you. Do we have any new business?
It's not really new, we're still plugging away on that track.
Okay.
Funding. We're getting closer. There's a light at the end of the tunnel, and I think there'll be a report next month
Yes.
about how all of the Carlisle facilities campaigns are going. So if you know anybody that would love to donate and get this thing closer to the end, we'd appreciate every dime.
Yes, Ms.
Thank
Stecker
you.
will be here.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Stecker will be here at the July board meeting to give
Yes.
us a report.
Okay.
Thank you.
Now we're going to move to executive session for purpose of treasurer evaluation. No action to follow. Time.
We're missing a voting line.
Oh, so moved.
Oh,
First by
we got a
Mrs.,
first, a second, okay. Roll
Wait a
call,
second.
please.
who had a second?
Bill did, Mr. Jewell.
Mr. Jewell. Mrs. McIntosh?
Yes.
Mr. Jewell?
Yes.
Mrs. Morris?
Yes.
Mrs. Milligan?
Yes.
Mrs. Miller?
Yes.
Time in executive session is 6:30, and there will be no action to follow.
We could change our minds.